The ink on the covenant of eternal peace had barely dried when Admiral Helena Vasquez first understood that humanity had made a terrible mistake. She stood on the observation deck of the UNS Prometheus, Earth's first interstellar diplomatic vessel, watching as the holographic signatures of 47 galactic species flickered above the crystalline treaty document. The ceremony had concluded 3 hours ago in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concordat, and the celebrating delegates had long since departed to their respective vessels. But Helena remained, her dark eyes fixed not on the treaty itself, but on the subtle expressions she had catalogued throughout the proceedings. The way the Vekthari ambassadors' mandibles had clicked with barely concealed amusement when humans agreed to limit their naval forces. The slight phosphorescent pulse of satisfaction that had rippled across the Luminari delegates' membrane when Earth accepted the demilitarized buffer zones around their 3 colony worlds. 23 years, she thought. 23 years since the breakthrough, when Dr. Marcus Chen had cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel, and humanity had stumbled into a galaxy already crowded with ancient civilizations. 23 years of careful diplomacy, of proving that the hairless apes from the Sol system could be trusted, could be civilized. And now, a treaty that promised humanity protection under the Concordat's collective security umbrella. In exchange, Earth and her colonies would limit their military to a modest defense force, enough to handle pirates and minor disputes, but nothing that could threaten the established powers. "You don't trust them," said a voice behind her. Helena turned to find Captain James Okonkwo, her chief of staff, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. His dark skin gleamed under the soft lighting, and his formal dress uniform bore the weight of medals earned in humanity's brief but bloody conflicts with border raiders. "I trust mathematics," Helena replied, accepting one of the glasses but not drinking from it. 47 species, each with their own interests, their own ancient grudges, their own territorial ambitions. And we're supposed to believe they'll all rush to defend a species they've known for barely 2 decades? James studied her face. The treaty is binding under Concordat law. Article 7 specifically guarantees. Article 7 guarantees a response from the Security Council, Helena interrupted. It doesn't define what that response must be. It doesn't set timeframes. It doesn't specify consequences for those who break it. She gestured at the holographic signatures still floating above the treaty. This document isn't a shield, James. It's a leash. Before her captain could respond, the deck shuddered beneath their feet. Red warning lights flashed to life, and the calm ambient music was replaced by the sharp wail of alert klaxons. "Admiral, to the bridge!" Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, and Helena was already moving, her champagne forgotten on the railing. The bridge of the Prometheus was controlled chaos when she arrived. Officers bent over their stations, fingers flying across holographic interfaces, while damage reports scrolled across multiple screens. "Report," Helena barked, sliding into her command chair. Lieutenant Commander Chen turned from the tactical display, her face pale. "Ma'am, we've detected a massive energy signature emerging from FTL approximately 200,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. Configuration matches." She paused, double-checking her readings. "Ma'am, it matches Vekthari military vessels. 17 ships, battle formation." Helena felt her blood run cold. The Vekthari were one of the Concordat's founding species, their empire spanning nearly 300 star systems. Their ambassador had signed the treaty not 4 hours ago. "Hail them," she ordered. "Already tried, ma'am." No response. But Chen's voice dropped. "Admiral, they're powering weapons." The first plasma bolt struck the Prometheus and ships, and humanity's introduction to galactic politics entered its second, far bloodier chapter. The attack on the Prometheus killed 943 humans. Admiral Vasquez was not among them. She and a handful of crew members escaped in a damaged shuttle, limping toward the nearest human colony on emergency power. But the attack on the diplomatic vessel was merely the opening move. Within 72 hours, Vekthari forces had struck all 3 of humanity's extrasolar colonies. New Shanghai, with its population of 800,000, was reduced to radioactive glass in a matter of hours. The defense satellites around New Kinshasa lasted 17 minutes before being overwhelmed, and the colony's inhabitants were forced into camps by Vekthari ground forces. Only New Petersburg, warned by a faster-than-light communications buoy launched by a dying crew member on the Prometheus, managed to mount any kind of defense, and even that was little more than a delay, buying time for evacuation ships to escape with a fraction of the population. On Earth, the news arrived like a thunderclap. Secretary General Antonio Reyes stood in the emergency session of the United Nations, his face aged a decade in a single day. Behind him, screens displayed the death tolls, the destruction, the images captured by survivors and transmitted across the void. "We invoke Article 7 of the Covenant of Eternal Peace," he declared, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Humanity calls upon the Galactic Concordat to fulfill its obligations and come to our defense against this unprovoked aggression." The response came within hours, and it was not what humanity had hoped for. Ambassador Zixthal of the Luminari appeared on human communication channels, its membrane rippling with colors that human scientists had learned to interpret as condescension. "The Concordat acknowledges the complaint filed by the human species," it intoned. "However, a thorough investigation must be conducted before any action can be taken. The Security Council will convene a preliminary hearing in, let me calculate in your primitive timekeeping, 14 of your solar months." 14 months? Secretary General Reyes's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Our people are dying now. Our colonies are burning now. The treaty demands—" "The treaty demands nothing," Ambassador Zixthal interrupted. "And if a being of pure light could smile, this one did. The treaty suggests, and we suggest, human, that you learn the difference." The transmission cut off, and with it, humanity's faith in galactic civilization. In the weeks that followed, the true scale of the betrayal became clear. Intelligence recovered from New Petersburg's evacuation fleet revealed that the Vekthari had not acted alone. Communications intercepts showed coordination with the Luminari, who had promised to delay any Concordat response. Financial records traced weapons sales from the Korthani consortium. Navigation data showed Vekthari ships using routes that could only have been provided by the Wayfarers Guild. 47 species had signed humanity's protection into galactic law. At least 15 had actively conspired to ensure that protection would never come. And as for the remaining 32? They remained silent. Humanity waited for heroes to rise from among the stars, for the promised intervention that would restore order and punish the aggressors. They waited for someone, anyone, to remember that a treaty had been signed, that obligations had been made, that the fundamental principles of galactic civilization. They waited in vain. 3 months after the attack on the Prometheus, with New Kinshasa still under occupation, and the Vekthari fleet massing for an assault on Earth itself, Secretary General Reyes addressed humanity one final time. "We came to the stars with open hands," he said, his voice broadcast to every surviving human settlement, every refugee ship, every resistant cell still fighting on occupied worlds. "We came with hope, with curiosity, with the belief that intelligence must inevitably lead to cooperation. We were wrong." He paused, and when he continued, the grief in his voice had hardened into something else entirely. "The galaxy has taught us a valuable lesson. They have shown us what treaties mean to them. Nothing. What promises mean. Nothing. What the lives of our children, our parents, our friends mean to the ancient and enlightened civilizations of the Concordat? Nothing." Behind him, the screens shifted. No longer did they show death tolls and destruction. Instead, they displayed schematics, production reports, recruitment numbers. They showed shipyards that had been operating in secret for 2 years, hidden in the asteroid belts of Sol. They showed training facilities buried beneath Luna's surface. They showed weapons systems that human scientists had developed in anticipation of a day they had prayed would never come.
The Concordat believed they were signing a treaty with a naive, peaceful species, Reyes continued. They believed we would accept the limits they placed on our military because we were told it was the price of civilization. They believed we were weak.
He smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. They were wrong. The Vekthari war fleet, officially designated the Grand Subjugation Armada, entered the Sol system expecting an easy victory. Their intelligence indicated that humanity's navy consisted of approximately 40 combat-capable vessels, mostly aging cruisers and escort ships. Against this pitiful force, High Admiral Crixath had assembled 217 warships, including 15 dreadnoughts capable of cracking planetary crusts.
What he found when his fleet emerged from FTL was somewhat different.
High Admiral, his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking with confusion. We are detecting anomalous readings. Explain, Crixath commanded, his compound eyes scanning the holographic display that should have shown the soft blue marble of Earth and its minimal defenses.
The readings indicate defensive installations throughout the system, automated weapon platforms, minefield signatures, and... The officer paused, rechecking his instruments. High Admiral, there appear to be shipyards in the asteroid belt. Large ones, very large.
Crixath waved a dismissive appendage. Civilian infrastructure. The humans were permitted light manufacturing capabilities for...
High Admiral, the shipyards are launching vessels.
The display updated, and for the first time in his 300-year military career, High Admiral Crixath felt the cold touch of uncertainty. Hundreds of ships were emerging from the asteroid belt. Not the sleek, elegant designs favored by Vekthari engineers, but something else entirely. Brutal, angular constructions bristling with weapons. Some were small and fast, darting through space like predatory fish. Others were massive, their hulls studded with gun emplacements and missile tubes.
How many? Crixath demanded.
His tactical officer was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper.
High Admiral, we are detecting 473 vessels emerging from hidden construction facilities. Additional units are launching from bases on Luna and Mars. Total count is currently... He paused as more signatures appeared. Total count is currently exceeding 700 and climbing.
The display was filling with red dots. Human ships. Each one a violation of the treaty the Concordat had forced humanity to sign. Each one a statement of defiance. Each one a promise of violence. A communication request appeared on Crixath's personal console. The identification code was human. He accepted it. The face that appeared belonged to a woman with gray-streaked dark hair and eyes that burned with a cold fury Crixath recognized. It was the look of a predator sighting prey.
High Admiral Crixath, said Admiral Helena Vasquez, survivor of the Prometheus massacre, now commanding the newly christened United Earth Navy. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Admiral Vasquez. Crixath's translator rendered his words in calm, measured English, betraying none of his growing unease. I must admit, we did not anticipate such preparations. No, Vasquez agreed. You didn't. That was rather the point. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what's going to happen, High Admiral. You and your fleet are going to surrender. You will power down your weapons, lower your shields, and prepare to be boarded. Your crews will be taken prisoner and treated in accordance with the Geneva Conventions, a human standard of conduct that we will explain to you in detail once you're in custody. Crixath's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. You are outnumbered, human. Your ships are newly constructed, your crews untested. My fleet has conquered a dozen species. You ask me to surrender?
I'm not asking.
The display flickered, and Crixath watched in horror as new signatures appeared, Not from the asteroid belt this time, but from Earth itself, massive orbital platforms powering up, their weapons arrays glowing with barely contained energy. We've had 2 years to prepare for this moment, High Admiral. 2 years of round-the-clock production, 2 years of training, 2 years of anger. Vasquez's voice was ice. You attacked our diplomatic vessel while the ink was still wet on a peace treaty. You butchered civilians on New Shanghai. You enslaved our people on New Kinshasa. Did you really think we would simply accept it?
The Concordat will not stand for.
The Concordat will do nothing, Vasquez interrupted. They've already proven that. And by the time your distress signal reaches the nearest Vekthari reinforcements, this battle will be over. Her eyes narrowed. So I'll ask one more time, High Admiral. Do you surrender?
Crixath drew himself up to his full height, his carapace gleaming under the bridge lights. The Vekthari do not surrender to lesser species. You will learn the price of defiance, human.
Vasquez nodded slowly, as if she had expected this answer. Very well. Admiral Chen, execute Operation Harvest.
The transmission cut off, and the battle for Seoul began. What the Vekthari failed to understand, what every species in the galaxy had failed to understand, was the sheer fury of human industry when given purpose. For 2 decades, humanity had been content to play the role of the wide-eyed newcomer, grateful for its place among the stars. They had accepted the restrictions on their military because they believed in the system, believed that the ancient and supposedly wise civilizations of the Concordat would honor their commitments. When that illusion shattered, humanity's response was not grief or despair. It was not even anger, not really. It was work. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had always been seen as worthless by galactic standards, a scattered collection of rocks with minimal strategic value. What the Concordat's intelligence services had failed to notice was that over the past decade, human mining operations in the belt had been quietly stockpiling materials. Iron, titanium, rare earth elements, everything needed for large-scale construction. When the order came to prepare for war, those stockpiles were transformed with terrifying speed.
3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Robots and humans working side by side, constructing warships on assembly lines that would have made Henry Ford weep with joy. Each vessel that emerged was ugly by galactic standards. No elegant curves, no artistic flourishes, just raw function. Armor thick enough to absorb punishment, weapons powerful enough to deliver it in return.
Engines capable of pushing them into battle at speeds that left Vekthari targeting systems struggling to compensate.
And powering all of this was something no galactic species had ever truly understood: humanity's capacity for total war. In the great conflicts of human history, entire national economies had been converted to war production. Automobile factories had produced tanks, clothing manufacturers had sewn uniforms, citizens had accepted rationing, sacrifice, and hardship in pursuit of victory. When humanity turned that industrial capacity toward the stars, the results were staggering. In 2 years, the species that the Concordat had declared fit only to be protected had transformed itself into a military power that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. And now, High Admiral Crixath was about to discover exactly what that meant. The Battle of Seoul lasted 17 hours.
Later analysts, and there would be many from dozens of species seeking to understand what had happened, would identify several key moments that determined its outcome.
The first was Admiral Vasquez's opening gambit. Rather than engaging the Vekthari fleet in a direct confrontation, she deployed her fastest ships in a wide dispersal pattern, using the system's asteroid fields and the gravitational wells of the outer planets as cover. Vekthari sensors, calibrated for the open space battles that characterized most galactic conflicts, struggled to track the darting human vessels. Meanwhile, Vasquez's heavier ships advanced in a formation that drew the Vekthari deeper into the system, away from their FTL egress points. It was a trap that would have been obvious to any student of human military history, but the Vekthari had never bothered to study the tactical traditions of a lesser species. By the time Crixath realized he was being drawn into a kill zone, it was too late. The human vessels that had been harrying his flanks suddenly concentrated their attacks on his rear echelons, destroying the support ships that maintained his fleet's communications and logistics. Simultaneously, the orbital platforms around Earth opened fire with weapons that made Vekthari plasma cannons look like children's toys, mass drivers that accelerated tungsten slugs to a significant fraction of light speed, guided missiles that could change course mid-flight to track their targets, and something the humans called Hellfire torpedoes, which delivered payloads of weaponized antimatter.
Crixath's dreadnoughts, pride of the Vekthari fleet, were among the first to fall. Their heavy armor, designed to withstand the energy weapons favored by most galactic powers, proved woefully inadequate against projectiles that struck with the force of nuclear explosions.
The High Admiral watched in growing horror as his fleet was methodically dismembered. Ships that attempted to break formation and flee were run down by human interceptors. Those that held their ground were overwhelmed by concentrated fire. Communications with other vessels became increasingly fragmented as jamming systems disrupted Vekthari frequencies.
11 hours into the battle, with over half his fleet destroyed or disabled, Crixath finally swallowed his pride and attempted to signal surrender.
The humans ignored him. Admiral Vasquez, his second-in-command, urged, "They're attempting to capitulate. Galactic law requires."
Galactic law didn't require the Concordat to protect us, Vasquez replied, her voice flat. Galactic law didn't prevent New Shanghai. Galactic law is whatever the powerful decide it is. She studied the tactical display, watching the final destruction of Vekthari resistance. Destroy them all, ma'am.
Every ship that escapes will carry word of our capabilities back to the Vekthari homeworlds. Every survivor will be a source of intelligence about our tactics, our technology, our resolve. Vasquez turned to face her second-in-command, and the fury in her eyes was terrible to behold. They started this war with a massacre. Let them learn what happens when humanity returns the favor. When the last Vekthari vessel was reduced to cooling debris, High Admiral Crixath and his 217 ships had become nothing more than a debris field spreading slowly through the outer reaches of the Sol system.
Not a single human vessel had been lost.
Part 3. The War of Retribution.
The destruction of the Grand Subjugation Armada sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. For the first time in recorded history, a fleet of the Vekthari, one of the galaxy's most ancient and militarily powerful species, had been completely annihilated by a species that, mere decades ago, had been throwing rocks at the moon and congratulating itself for the achievement. In the halls of the Galactic Concordat, panic began to set in.
Ambassador Zixthal of the Luminari, whose 14-month delay had condemned humanity to face the Vekthari alone, found itself besieged by requests for emergency sessions. Species that had remained silent during humanity's hour of need now clamored for action, not to punish the Vekthari for their treaty violation, but to contain the suddenly terrifying humans before they could strike again.
"They must be brought to heel," demanded Ambassador Vrothkai of the Korthani Consortium, the same organization that had supplied weapons to the Vekthari. Their fleet construction violated the terms of the Covenant. Their refusal to accept surrender violated the laws of civilized warfare. They must be sanctioned, contained, controlled. "And how do you propose we accomplish this?" asked Ambassador Thessalia of the Wayfarers Guild, whose navigation data had guided Vekthari ships to human colonies. The fleet that just destroyed 200 Vekthari warships is now larger than any single force the Concordat can deploy. And according to our intelligence, "Your intelligence is worthless," snarled Ambassador Crixfor, the new head of the Vekthari delegation following the death of his predecessor aboard one of the destroyed dreadnoughts. "Your intelligence told us the humans had 40 ships. Your intelligence told us they would surrender at the first show of force. Your intelligence has led us to disaster." Perhaps, Zixthal intoned, its membrane flickering with agitation, we should consider diplomatic overtures, a new treaty.
They will not accept a new treaty. The voice came from the far end of the chamber, and the assembled ambassadors turned to face its source.
Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the entrance to the hall, flanked by 2 human marines in full combat armor. Wei was elderly, her hair white and her movements slow, but her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the gathered representatives of galactic civilization.
Ambassador Chen, Zixthal began, you were not summoned to this session. No, Wei agreed, walking slowly toward the center of the chamber. I was not, but I thought you might want to hear directly from the species you're discussing. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Consider it a courtesy. We thought you might appreciate knowing what's coming.
The chamber fell silent.
The Vekthari attacked our diplomatic vessel, butchered our colonists, and enslaved our citizens, Wei continued. They did this with the active assistance of at least 15 species represented in this chamber, and the passive consent of the remaining 32. When we invoked the treaty you yourselves drafted, you told us to wait. You told us to be patient. You told us that a thorough investigation must be conducted.
She stopped in the center of the floor, surrounded by beings that had ruled the galaxy for millennia and showed no fear whatsoever. We have conducted our own investigation. We know which species provided weapons to the Vekthari. We know which species shared intelligence on our defensive capabilities. We know which species provided navigation data, logistical support, and financial backing. We have names. We have evidence. We have proof of conspiracy.
These allegations are, Vrothkai began.
Irrelevant to you, I'm sure, Wei interrupted, but quite relevant to us. As of this moment, the United Earth government considers itself to be in a state of war with the Vekthari hegemony. She paused, letting that sink in. Not with the Concordat, not yet. We're willing to believe that some of you genuinely had no part in the conspiracy against us. But let me be clear about what will happen if any species, for any reason, provides aid or comfort to the Vekthari from this point forward.
She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of each ambassador in turn. We will add them to our list, and we will come for them in their time.
Ambassador Krixvor surged to his feet, his carapace clicking with rage. You dare threaten the Concordat? You are 1 species against 47. Your fleet may have grown, but you cannot stand against the combined might of—
Cannot we? Wei asked quietly. High Admiral Krixath said much the same thing before the Battle of Seoul. Would you like to see his flagship? I believe some of the debris is still in recoverable condition.
Krixvor fell silent.
The Vekthari have 300 star systems, Wei continued. They have hundreds of millions of soldiers, thousands of warships, resources that dwarf anything humanity currently possesses. By any objective measure, they should be able to crush us. She smiled again. But I'm going to tell you a secret, something your intelligence agencies clearly never understood about our species. She leaned forward slightly. We do not stop. We do not surrender. We do not accept that the battle is lost while a single one of us still draws breath. You attacked us because you thought we were weak, because we sought peace instead of war, because we chose diplomacy over violence. You were wrong. We chose peace because we know what we become when we choose war. We chose diplomacy because we have seen what happens when we don't. Ambassador Wei turned and began walking toward the exit, her marine escort falling into step beside her.
We're going to conquer the Vekthari hegemony, she said without looking back. We're going to free our people from New Kinshasa. We're going to make them pay for every life they took, every city they burned, every treaty they broke. And when we're done, we're going to come back here, and we're going to have a very different conversation about humanity's place in this galaxy.
She paused at the door.
You should pray we succeed, because if the Vekthari manage to destroy us, they won't stop there. They'll come for everyone who failed to stop the humans when they had the chance. And unlike us, they won't give you warning.
The door closed behind her, and the Galactic Concordat erupted into chaos. The War of Retribution, as humanity would come to call it, began 3 months after the Battle of Sol.
Human intelligence had identified the location of the Vekthari's primary military production facilities, a cluster of moons orbiting a gas giant in the Cathara system, approximately 40 light-years from Earth. These facilities produced the majority of the Vekthari fleet's ammunition, replacement parts, and new construction. Destroying them would cripple the hegemony's ability to wage prolonged war.
Admiral Vasquez personally led the assault.
The fleet that dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Cathara system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 4,000 human warships, ranging from nimble corvettes to massive battleships that dwarfed even Vekthari dreadnoughts. They advanced in formations that had been developed over centuries of naval warfare on Earth's oceans, adapted for the three-dimensional battlefield of space.
And they brought with them something that would change the nature of galactic conflict forever: carriers.
Human military doctrine had always emphasized the importance of striking power combined with flexibility. While other species built their fleets around increasingly large warships, vessels that took decades to construct, and represented investments of resources that couldn't be easily replaced, humans had taken a different approach.
The carriers that accompanied the assault fleet were mobile bases, each one capable of deploying hundreds of small, piloted fighters. These fighters were cheap to produce, easy to replace, and operated by crews that had been trained in combat simulators since childhood. Where Vekthari capital ships required crews of thousands and years of construction, human fighters required only a pilot and could be manufactured in days.
The defenders of Cathara had never faced such a force.
The battle began with long-range bombardment, human ships launching salvos of missiles and tungsten slugs at the orbital defense platforms protecting the production facilities. Vekthari plasma batteries returned fire, and for a few minutes the engagement resembled the traditional fleet actions that had characterized galactic warfare for millennia.
Then the carriers launched their fires. Thousands of small craft swarmed out of the human formation, each one piloted by a human who had spent years training for this moment. They moved with a coordination that seemed almost organic, flowing around Vekthari point defense fire like water around stones. While the capital ships drew the attention of the enemy fleet, the fighters slipped through gaps in the defensive formation and began their attack runs on the production facilities.
The Vekthari had no answer for this tactic. Their weapon systems were designed to target large, slow-moving capital ships, not swarms of tiny attackers moving at velocities that pushed the limits of their sensors. By the time they began to adapt their fire patterns, the first wave of fighters had already delivered their payloads, precision-guided munitions that targeted the vulnerable points of the orbital factories.
Within 2 hours, the Cathara production complex was a field of debris. But the humans weren't finished. Rather than withdrawing, Admiral Vasquez ordered her fleet to proceed to the 4th planet of the Cathara system, a world that served as a major Vekthari population center, home to nearly 2 billion civilians.
"Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from the planetary government. They're requesting surrender negotiations."
Vasquez studied the tactical display, her face unreadable. Their surrender terms?
They're offering full cooperation with human occupation forces, access to all military data, and the immediate release of any human prisoners being held in the system.
For a long moment, Vasquez was silent. She thought of New Shanghai, reduced to glass. She thought of the colonists of New Kinshasa, forced into camps. She thought of the 943 crew members of the Prometheus, killed while their ship carried a message of peace. "Accept their surrender," she said finally. "All terms. Full cooperation, full access, immediate release of prisoners." Her second-in-command looked surprised. "Ma'am?"
"We're not them," Vasquez said quietly. "We're not going to glass their cities or enslave their people. We're going to occupy this system, and we're going to treat its inhabitants with the dignity they never showed us." She turned to face her command staff. "Pass the word to all ships.
Any act of reprisal against Vekthari civilians will be treated as a war crime and prosecuted accordingly. We fight to win, not to destroy.
The occupation of Cathara proceeded without significant incident. Human forces landed on the fourth planet and established provisional government structures. Vekthari civilians, who had been told that humans were savage monsters bent on genocide, found themselves confronted with an occupation force that distributed food, maintained order, and treated the wounded, even Vekthari wounded, with care.
Word spread quickly through the hegemony. The humans were not what the propaganda claimed. They were not mindless killers. They were not the savages that Vekthari leadership had portrayed.
They were, in many ways, more civilized than the civilization that had attacked them.
Part 4. The Breaking Point.
The War of Retribution lasted 3 years.
In that time, humanity conquered 37 Vekthari star systems, liberated millions of human prisoners from labor camps and detention facilities, and destroyed the military capacity of one of the galaxy's oldest spacefaring powers. Each victory added to the legend of human military prowess, the precision of their strikes, the coordination of their forces, the apparently endless supply of ships and soldiers that flowed from the Sol System's industrial centers.
But it was not the battles that broke the Vekthari. It was the occupations. In every system they conquered, humans established the same pattern: military control, followed by provisional civilian government, followed by integration. Vekthari citizens who cooperated were treated fairly, given access to human medical technology and educational resources, allowed to maintain their cultural practices and religious observances.
Those who resisted were dealt with firmly but not cruelly. Insurgents were captured, tried, and imprisoned. Their families were not punished for their actions. Their communities were not burned in reprisal. And slowly, inexorably, Vekthari society began to fracture. For millennia, the hegemony had maintained control through fear. Citizens who questioned authority were punished. Dissent was crushed. The lower castes of Vekthari society, those who worked the factories and farms that supported the ruling military elite, had no voice, no power, no hope of changing their circumstances.
Now, in the occupied territories, they saw something different. They saw humans treating Vekthari workers with respect. They saw human administrators consulting with local populations before making decisions. They saw a society that, while unquestionably in control, did not rule through terror. The first Vekthari rebellion against the hegemony occurred in the Thaxis system, on a manufacturing world where workers had been forced to produce weapons for a war they had never supported. When human forces arrived, the workers did not resist. They welcomed them, turning on the military garrison that had oppressed them for generations. Similar revolts followed in a dozen systems. Vekthari citizens, given the choice between rule by their own brutal elite and occupation by the apparently more humane humans, increasingly chose humanity. The hegemony's leadership watched their empire crumbling from within and realized they had made a terrible calculation.
Supreme Commander Crix Thathon, highest military authority in the Vekthari hegemony, called an emergency session of the War Council.
"We are losing," he said flatly, "not through lack of firepower or courage, but through the corruption of our own population. The humans have weaponized mercy. They treat our people better than we do, and our people are abandoning us because of it." "Then we must match their methods," suggested one of his subordinates. "Improve conditions for the lower castes, grant them more freedoms."
"It is too late for that," Crixthon interrupted. "The damage is done. Our people have seen what human occupation looks like, and they prefer it to our rule." He clicked his mandibles in frustration. "We have one option remaining. We must end this war decisively before our entire society collapses."
The plan that emerged from that War Council session was born of desperation. If the Vekthari could not match human military power, if they could not counter human propaganda, then they would strike at the one target that might break human morale: Earth itself. Over the following months, the hegemony gathered every remaining warship, every reserve,
every vessel that could carry weapons into battle. They stripped their remaining colonies of defenses, leaving billions of Vekthari citizens unprotected. They conscripted every able-bodied male of fighting age, training them in minimal function roles that would allow them to crew the assembled fleet.
The Grand Armada of the Last Dawn, as it came to be known, numbered over 8,000 warships. It represented the last military strength of the Vekthari hegemony, everything the species had left to throw against the humans who had humiliated them, conquered their worlds, and stolen the loyalty of their people.
Supreme Commander Crixthon himself led the fleet. "Either we destroy Earth," he told his officers on the eve of their departure, "or humanity destroys us. There is no middle ground. There is no surrender. This is the final battle of our civilization."
The Grand Armada departed for Sol, and the Vekthari hegemony held its collective breath.
Admiral Helena Vasquez received word of the approaching fleet while inspecting the liberation of New Kinshasa.
The world was healing. The camps where Vekthari forces had imprisoned human colonists were being demolished, replaced with temporary housing while permanent reconstruction proceeded. The surviving colonists, those who had endured 3 years of occupation, forced labor, and systematic abuse, were slowly emerging from the trauma of their experience.
Vasquez had made time to speak with some of them. Their stories were the reason she fought, the reason she pushed her forces harder than any peacetime commander would dare. Every tale of suffering, every account of cruelty, every memory of loved ones lost reminded her why this war could not end until the Vekthari hegemony was broken beyond recovery.
The message from Earth Command arrived as she was leaving a memorial service for colonists who had not survived.
"Admiral," her aide reported, "long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching Sol. Configuration is Vekthari. Estimated strength is..." He paused, checking his datapad. 8,000 warships, ma'am, including everything they've held in reserve."
Vasquez absorbed this information with the calm that 3 years of warfare had instilled in her. They're making their final play.
"So it would seem, ma'am. Earth Command is requesting all available forces return to Sol for defense."
For a long moment, Vasquez was silent. She looked out the window of her shuttle at New Kinshasa's scarred but recovering surface, at the former concentration camps being reclaimed by forest and farmland.
"No," she said finally.
Her aide blinked. "Ma'am?"
If I pull my forces back to Sol, we abandon every system we've liberated. The Vekthari will reclaim them, and the people who trusted us will suffer for their faith. Vasquez shook her head. We don't retreat. We don't abandon allies.
"But Earth
has its own defenses." Vasquez turned from the window, her face set. "And it has something else, something the Vekthari have never faced." She began issuing orders, and the human forces scattered across Vekthari space began to move, not toward Sol, but deeper into enemy territory, toward the Vekthari homeworld, toward the heart of the hegemony. "If they want to strike at our home," Vasquez said, "we'll strike at theirs. Let's see who blinks first." The Battle of Earth, as it would later be known, began when the Grand Armada of the Last Dawn emerged from FTL in the outer reaches of the Sol system.
Supreme Commander Crixthon immediately ordered his sensors to assess the defenses he would face. The readings that came back were concerning.
"The orbital platforms are more heavily armed than our intelligence indicated," his tactical officer reported, "and there appear to be significant minefields in the approaches to the inner system."
What of their fleet? Crixthon demanded.
We are detecting approximately 2,000 warships in defensive positions around Earth and Mars. The officer hesitated. However, long-range scans suggest the majority of their main battle fleet is not present. It appears to be elsewhere.
Crixthon's compound eyes narrowed. Elsewhere. Before the officer could respond, a communication request arrived. The identification code was human.
Crixthon accepted it, and the face of an elderly human male appeared on his display. The translation identified him as Director James Okonkwo, now serving as Earth's primary military coordinator.
Supreme Commander Crixthan, Director Okonkwo said calmly, I've been asked to inform you of a few developments you may find relevant.
I am not interested in your propaganda, human. Your fleet is away, your home defenseless. You cannot.
Our fleet is currently approaching your homeworld, Okonkwo interrupted. Admiral Vasquez sends her regards. She wanted you to know that if your armada does not withdraw from the Sol system within the next 6 hours, she will begin bombarding Vekthari Prime.
Crixthan froze.
You're bluffing. Am I? Okonkwo's expression didn't change. You gathered every ship you had for this assault, Supreme Commander. Every ship. You stripped your remaining colonies of defenses, conscripted every available soldier, emptied your reserves. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?
The tactical display updated as new data arrived. Crixthan watched in growing horror as intelligence confirmed the humans' claims. A massive human fleet, nearly 3,000 warships, was indeed approaching Vekthari Prime, the hegemony's home world, seat of their civilization for millennia, home to 12 billion Vekthari citizens.
Defenseless. You wouldn't, Crixthan said, but his voice lacked conviction. You wouldn't murder civilians.
We won't have to, Okonkwo replied. Your government will surrender the moment our ships enter orbit. They won't sacrifice their people for a war they've already lost. He leaned forward slightly. But you have a choice to make, Supreme Commander. You can continue toward Earth, destroy our world, kill our people, and in doing so, you will guarantee the extinction of your species. Or you can withdraw, and we can end this war with terms that allow the Vekthari to survive.
Crixthan's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Why would you offer terms? You have won. You could destroy us entirely.
Because we're not you. Okonkwo's voice was quiet but firm. We didn't start this war, Supreme Commander. We didn't break the treaty. We didn't massacre civilians or enslave populations. We've fought to survive, and now we've won. But victory doesn't have to mean annihilation. It can mean something else, something better.
The tactical display continued to update. The human fleet was hours away from Vekthari Prime. Crixthan's own forces were still days from Earth. If he continued the attack, his home world would fall long before he could exact revenge.
And then, even if he destroyed Earth, the human fleet would return. They would hunt down every surviving Vekthari ship, every colony, every settlement. They would pursue the hegemony to extinction.
Unless they didn't. Unless, as the human claimed, there was another way.
What terms? Crixthan asked, finally.
Immediate cessation of hostilities, withdrawal of all Vekthari forces from human-claimed space, full reparations to be negotiated, recognition of human sovereignty over all currently occupied Vekthari systems. The populations there have made their choice, and we won't force them to return to your rule.
And if I refuse?
Okonkwo's expression hardened. Then Admiral Vasquez begins her bombardment, and the Vekthari hegemony becomes a historical footnote. Your choice, Supreme Commander. You have 6 hours.
The transmission ended, and Crixthan was left alone with the weight of his civilization's future.
The surrender of the Grand Armada of the Last Dawn was the moment the War of Retribution effectively ended.
Supreme Commander Crixthan ordered his forces to stand down 3 hours after Director Okonkwo's ultimatum, having spent those hours desperately trying to contact Vekthari Prime and receiving no response. He never learned whether Admiral Vasquez had actually begun her approach to the homeworld, or whether the entire thing had been an elaborate bluff.
It didn't matter. The Vekthari had been broken.
In the weeks that followed, diplomats from both species met to negotiate the Treaty of Sol, a document that would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. The terms were harsh, but not punitive.
The Vekthari hegemony would pay reparations to humanity over the next 50 years in the form of resources, technology, and development assistance for human colonies. All Vekthari forces would be reduced to a purely defensive capacity, monitored by human inspectors.
The 37 star systems currently under human occupation would be given the choice of remaining under human administration or returning to Vekthari control, a choice that would ultimately see 29 of those systems choose humanity.
Most significantly, the treaty established new principles of galactic law. Treaties would have enforcement mechanisms, violations would have consequences, and a new body, the Security Directorate, would be created to ensure compliance, with humanity as its primary enforcer.
When the treaty was presented to the Galactic Concordat for ratification, the reaction was complex.
Ambassador Chen Wei returned to the Grand Assembly Hall where, years earlier, she had warned the galaxy of what was coming. This time, she came not as a supplicant or a messenger of war, but as the representative of a species that had proven itself capable of standing among the stars.
3 years ago, she addressed the assembled representatives. I stood in this chamber and told you that humanity was coming. You chose not to listen. You chose to believe that the ancient order of things, the order in which older species dictated terms to younger ones, would continue forever.
She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the gathered beings.
That order is over. The Vekthari hegemony, one of the founding powers of this Concordat, has been brought to its knees by a species you dismissed as primitive. And they were not alone in their conspiracy against us. We know who helped them. We know who funded them. We know who looked the other way while our people died.
Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. We have chosen not to pursue those grievances. For now, we have chosen to believe that perhaps, having seen what happens when treaties are broken, the galaxy might be ready to take its obligations more seriously. Wei's voice hardened. But let me be clear about what will happen if we are disappointed again.
She activated a holographic display, and the assembled representatives watched as images of the War of Retribution played across the chamber's screens. The destruction of the Grand Subjugation Armada, the fall of Cathara, the liberation of New Kinshasa, the surrender of Crixthon's final fleet.
Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive, and humanity does not stop until the job is done. Wei deactivated the display. We came to the stars hoping for peace. We were given war. We won. And now we're going to build something better, whether you help us or not.
She turned and walked toward the exit, just as she had years earlier. The treaty is on your desks. I suggest you sign it. This time, no one argued. Part 5. The New Order. 50 years after the Treaty of Seoul, the galaxy was a very different place. The Galactic Concordat still existed, but its nature had changed fundamentally. No longer was it a club of ancient powers dividing the stars among themselves. The Security Directorate, dominated by humans but including representatives of the Vekthari and several other reformed species, enforced a new set of rules. Treaties were binding, violations were punished, and species that had once believed themselves above the law now found themselves accountable to standards they had never imagined.
Humanity had expanded to nearly 100 star systems, their population growing with the seemingly inexhaustible energy that had always characterized the species. Some were colonies founded on virgin worlds. Others were former Vekthari territories whose populations had chosen human governance. A few were systems seeded by other species, seeking to curry favor with the galaxy's new power. And on Earth, in the city of Geneva, a museum had been built to commemorate the war that had made it all possible.
Admiral Helena Vasquez, now 93 years old, walked slowly through the exhibits with the aid of a powered exoskeleton. Around her, visitors, human and alien alike, studied displays documenting the history of humanity's rise to galactic prominence. The attack on the Prometheus, the destruction of New Shanghai, the Battle of Seoul, the liberation campaigns, the final surrender.
She stopped before a display showing the Treaty of Seoul in its original form, the document that had ended the war and established humanity's new position in the galaxy.
Admiral Vasquez?
She turned to find a young Vekthari female approaching, her carapace bearing the markings of a historical scholar. Yes? I am Krixlana. I'm writing a historical analysis of the war for the University of New Vekthari Prime. I was hoping, if it's not too much to ask, you might be willing to share your perspective on certain events. Vasquez studied the young scholar for a moment. 50 years ago, she had ordered the destruction of this being species' military. Now, Krixlana stood before her as a fellow citizen of the galactic community, free to study history, ask questions, pursue truth. What would you like to know? Vasquez asked. The moment you decided to accept the surrender of the Cathara system, rather than continuing the attack, many scholars believe that was the turning point of the war. That showing mercy in that moment was what ultimately convinced Vekthari civilians to accept human occupation. Krixlana hesitated. Was that calculated? Were you thinking about the strategic implications? Vasquez considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. I wasn't thinking about strategy. I was thinking about my crew, about the people who had died on the Prometheus, who had been killed on New Shanghai, who had suffered on New Kinshasa. I was thinking about what they would have wanted. And what did they want? They wanted to be better. Vasquez turned back to the display, her eyes distant. When the Vekthari attacked us, they could have just demanded our surrender. They could have conquered us without massacre, occupied our worlds without camps, won the war without atrocity. They chose not to. They chose cruelty because they thought it would make us afraid. She shook her head slowly. It made us angry. It made us fight harder than we would have otherwise. But more than that, it showed us exactly what we didn't want to become. Every time I was tempted to order reprisals, every time I felt the rage pushing me toward vengeance, I remembered New Shanghai. I remembered what it meant to be the victim of that kind of violence. And I chose to be something else. Krixlana was silent for a moment, processing this. Many of my people believe that humanity won the war because you were stronger, faster, more numerous than we expected, she said finally. But I've read the histories, studied the tactics, analyzed the numbers. You weren't stronger, not at first. You weren't more numerous. The hegemony had a population 100 times your size. What you were was more determined, more united, more willing to sacrifice for each other. Maybe, Vasquez agreed, or maybe we were just lucky. History is full of moments where things could have gone differently. Do you believe that? That it was luck? Vasquez smiled, and for a moment, the old fire flickered in her eyes. No, I believe we won because we fought for something. The Vekthari fought for power, for dominance, for the continuation of an order that had benefited them for millennia. We fought for survival, and then for justice, and then for a galaxy that could be better than the one we'd found. She reached out and touched the display case, her wrinkled fingers tracing the lines of the treaty. People fight harder when they believe in what they're fighting for. They sacrifice more, they endure more. They find strength they didn't know they had, because the alternative, giving up, accepting defeat, is unthinkable. She turned to face Krixlana directly. The galaxy broke its treaty with us. They thought we would accept it, adapt to it, learn to live with our diminished place. They didn't understand that humans don't work that way. Then, what way do humans work?
Vasquez smiled.
We push back, we resist, we fight. Not because we love war, most of us hate it, but because we cannot accept injustice. We cannot tolerate cruelty. We cannot look at a galaxy that breaks its promises and says, "This is how things are," and simply nod in agreement. She gestured at the museum around them, at the visitors learning the history of humanity's greatest trial. We broke their armies because they gave us no choice. And then we built something better, because that's what we do. Krixlana bowed her head in the Vekthari gesture of respect. Thank you, Admiral. This has been illuminated. One more thing, Vasquez said as the scholar turned to leave. Yes?
The Vekthari have been good neighbors these past 50 years, better than many species who claim to be our friends. Your people learned from the war. They changed. Vasquez's expression softened. Humans value that. We believe in redemption, in second chances. The galaxy that your children will inherit will be better than the one your grandparents knew, in part because your species chose to walk a different path.
Crixlana stood still for a moment, then nodded slowly.
I hope you're right, Admiral.
So do I, Vasquez replied. So do I.
Epilogue. The stars remember.
100 years after the Treaty of Sol, a Concordat vessel approached the outer reaches of a newly discovered star system. Its crew was diverse: humans, Vekthari, Luminari, and half a dozen other species working together in the manner that had become standard throughout civilized space.
Captain Sarah Chen, great-granddaughter of Marcus Chen, whose discovery of FTL travel had begun humanity's journey to the stars, stood on the bridge as her ship completed its survey of the system.
Preliminary scans complete, Captain, her Vekthari first officer reported. The system contains 17 planetary bodies, including 3 within the habitable zone. No signs of intelligent life.
Another candidate for colonization, Chen mused. That makes 4 this quarter.
Yes, Captain. At current expansion rates, the Concordat will encompass 2,000 star systems within the next century. Chen nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the plaque that hung in her quarters, a replica of the one installed on every human vessel, bearing words spoken by Admiral Vasquez at the end of the War of Retribution. We came to the stars hoping for peace. We were given war. We won. And now we build something better. 100 years. In that time, humanity had grown from a single world to a power spanning dozens of systems. They had fought a war that many species still studied, trying to understand how a primitive race had humbled one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. They had established new principles of galactic governance, ended conflicts that had simmered for millennia, and proven that species could change, could grow beyond the assumptions and prejudices that had defined them.
And yet, Chen knew the work was never truly done. Even now, there were factions within the Concordat who resented humanity's rise. There were species on the fringes of known space who had never accepted the new order. There were those who remembered the old galaxy, where might made right and treaties were merely suggestions, and who dreamed of returning to that simpler time.
Captain, her communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the Concordat Science Directorate. They're requesting we investigate an anomalous reading near the system's outer asteroid belt.
Put it on screen. The main display shifted to show a dense cluster of asteroids, and within it, something that shouldn't have been there. Artificial structures, clearly ancient, their design unlike anything in the Concordat's archives.
Unknown construction, the science officer, a luminari whose membrane pulsed with excitement, reported. Carbon dating suggests an age of approximately 50,000 years. Captain, this predates every known spacefaring civilization.
Chen felt a chill run down her spine. 50,000 years. Before humanity had discovered fire, before the Vekthari had mastered writing, before any species currently in the Concordat had looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them.
Who built it? She asked. Unknown. No match in any database. But, Captain, the science officer hesitated. The design includes what appear to be defensive installations, heavy weapons by the scale of the emplacements. Whatever species built this, they were prepared for war. Chen turned to her first officer. Recommendations? The Vekthari's compound eyes reflected the display, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Standard first contact protocols, I suppose. Approach cautiously, document everything, report to the Directorate.
Agreed. Chen straightened in her command chair. But I want weapons powered up and ready. Whoever built this, whatever happened to them, they were afraid of something. Let's make sure we're not caught off guard.
As her ship began its careful approach to the ancient structures, Captain Chen found herself thinking once again about Admiral Vasquez, about the lessons humanity had learned in the fires of war.
They had come to the stars hoping for peace. They had been given war. They had won. But the galaxy was vast and old and full of secrets. And humanity had learned, perhaps more thoroughly than any other species, that the universe was not kind to those who were unprepared.
We came to the stars hoping for peace, she thought as she closed on the unknown structures. But we also came prepared for war, and whatever's out there, we'll be ready.
The stars, as always, kept their secrets. But humanity was patient. Humanity was determined. And humanity, as the galaxy had learned to its cost, did not stop until the job was done.
The investigation of the ancient structures would reveal much, hints of a species that had risen and fallen before any current civilization existed, warnings of threats that lurked in the dark spaces between stars, and technologies that would reshape galactic society yet again. But those discoveries, and the challenges they would bring, were stories for another time. For now, it was enough to know that humanity was there, ready to face whatever came, ready to defend what they had built, to protect those who had joined their cause, and to answer any threat with the same determination that had carried them through the darkest days of their history.
The galaxy had broken its treaty with humanity once. No one who remembered what had happened was eager to see what would happen if it were tried again. From the personal memoirs of Admiral Helena Vasquez, dictated 3 weeks before her death at age 112. They ask me, sometimes, what I remember most about the war. They expect me to talk about the battles, the destruction of Kriksath's fleet, the liberation of New Kinshasa, the moment when Kriksath's armada finally stood down.
Those were important moments, of course. They shaped history in ways that will echo for millennia, but they're not what I remember most.
What I remember is standing on the observation deck of the Prometheus, watching the Vekthari signatures appear on our sensors, and knowing, absolutely knowing, that everything was about to change. I remember thinking that we had made a terrible mistake, that we had trusted beings who saw us as nothing more than useful prey, that our hope for a peaceful place among the stars had been naive and foolish.
I was right about some things and wrong about others.
Yes, we had been naive. Yes, we had trusted too easily. Yes, the galaxy was not the welcoming community we had hoped to find. But I was wrong to think it couldn't be changed. I was wrong to believe that humanity's role would always be that of the victim. We changed the galaxy. We broke their armies. Not because we wanted power, not because we sought revenge, but because they gave us no choice. And then, having won, we did something that no one expected. We tried to make things better.
We showed mercy to our enemies. We rebuilt what we had destroyed. We created systems of accountability and justice that the ancient powers had never bothered to establish. We proved that strength and compassion could coexist, that victory did not require cruelty.
It wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to burn everything, to make the Vekthari suffer as they had made us suffer. The rage was always there, waiting. But I had read enough history to know where that path led. I had seen enough of the old galaxy to understand that cycles of vengeance destroyed everyone they touched.
So we chose differently. We chose to be better than our enemies. And in doing so, we became something new. Not just conquerors, but builders. Not just warriors, but healers. Not just survivors, but leaders. The galaxy broke their treaty with us because they thought we were weak. They learned that we were not. But the greater lesson, the one I hope will endure long after I am gone, is that strength and honor can go hand in hand. That power does not corrupt when it is wielded in service of principle. That the stars are vast enough for all who are willing to share them fairly.
I don't know what challenges the future will bring. I don't know what enemies our descendants will face, what alliances they will build, what wars they may have to fight. But I know they will carry with them the lessons we learned in fire and blood. They will know what humanity is capable of,
both the darkness and the light.
And if anyone ever tries to break a treaty with them again,
God help the fools who try. The end.